Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Good evening. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. It's DuEwa here. DuEwa with a podcast on my Instagram live at Dr. DuEwa Writes. And I'm talking from the foundation of an idea called That's Code with DuEwa Frazier, okay? So if you guys want to join me, great. If you want to check out the recorded live that I save later or on YouTube, great. But anyway, I just thought I'd check in with you all on a few topics of interest related to culture, entertainment, definitely some things that I've been interested in and things that people have been talking about. And you'll see that I've been kind of promoting it a little bit. Not a whole lot. I've been crazy busy, but I did make a couple posts saying that I was going to go live tonight. I just wasn't exactly sure what time. Okay, so first I want to start off with Queen Charlotte. So how many of you all have been watching Queen Charlotte? We know that it's a very popular series from a larger series produced by Shonda Rhimes for Shondaland. Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story on Netflix. We know there's been a lot of talk and chatter questioning whether or not Queen Charlotte is actually true in terms of historical value and actual events that have occurred in the past, including the persona that is shown to us, and that being Queen Charlotte as a Black woman in the Shonda Rhimes Shondaland series. So in the 6-part series, it's happening now. I believe it just started early this month, if not late April. Queen Charlotte is played by a young Black woman. And many people have been questioning, is this true? Is this historically valid? And, you always have people on social media trying to, race debate. That's what I call it. Race debate and question the validity of whether a particular character or someone in a film could actually be Black or of color. They're going through that whole debate now with, Cleopatra. There's a new series coming out on Netflix about Cleopatra. And there are people saying, she is not a brown woman or was not a Black woman. However, we know that she was Egyptian. She was North African. And you can't have North African without North Africa or without Africa. And we know there are people of color in Africa. Okay, but I won't go there. We're not talking about Cleopatra tonight. Okay, so getting back to Queen Charlotte, just to give you all some background in case you hadn't been watching or checking it out. The series is a 6-episode Netflix prequel series, Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story. It tells the tale of young Charlotte, played by the young actress India Amar Tafio. I hope I didn't mispronounce her name. Goodness knows that I have a lot of people that butcher my name every day, so I don't want to butcher anyone else's name. But Miss India plays young Charlotte, who is a young Black woman in the series. As she begins her rise to power, viewers witness her whirlwind marriage to King George III. The viewers also meet her quote-unquote delinquent children and come to better understand her motivations and her sense of loneliness. And one thing about the series, if you've been watching it, it goes kind of back and forth from the present day queen, who is an older woman, and it kind of depicts her as being although she's like all power and, everyone's afraid of her. And she has, of course, the beautiful gowns and the exquisite and very complicated looking wigs and all the jewelry and the fanfare. But that she's a very lonely woman who is married to a man who, by all accounts, in terms of the actual movie or series, it seems that he has some kind of illness, some malady, whether it's mental or physical, and he seems to be really hidden from the public. So that's kind of what we're getting in the series, but there's a lot more to that. Okay, so the series itself on Netflix gives you these flashbacks to when Queen Charlotte was young, in the middle of her courtship with King George III, at first not wanting to marry him. She was very young. And then it jumps into the present, because the woman is really upset that she does not have any royal heirs. She has all these kids and none of them have produced kids that could be an heir to the throne, so to speak. So that's part of the conflict. Sorry if I just spoiled a little bit for you all, but it's not a big deal. You'll see there's a whole lot else going on in the series, but I just thought I'd drop that nugget on you. Okay, so getting back to more of the synopsis here. Whirlwind marriage. Viewers get plenty of glimpses, of course, into the whole royal bedchamber. According to Shonda Rhimes, she says, the love of Queen Charlotte and King George united the nation. That's one sentence in Bridgerton. And to me, that told a whole world. And so Shonda Rhimes, the producer, who you know is very famous for having created Scandal, that whole popular series on ABC that took place years ago on Thursday. It used to be called, I think, Can't Wait Thursday or Must Watch Thursday or something. Like, Thursday night was Shonda Rhimes night because she had, I think The Practice, Grey's Anatomy, she had Scandal, she had How to Get Away with Murder, and Shonda Rhimes was just owning primetime television, particularly on, the regular television channels, right? Okay, so now she's on Netflix, and, Bridgerton has been Shonda's thing for the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic. All right, so let me go back. So now, going back to the question, which is connected to my podcast tonight, which is Queen Charlotte fact or fiction? Is this fact or fiction? So let's go to some of the questions that are here. So according to a New York Times article, a recent New York Times article written by journalist Kalia Richardson as of this past week, viewers and a lot of folks do have some questions about what's historical about the actual Queen Charlotte, what's true in terms of the points that we should know historically in terms of, why did Shonda Rhimes choose to depict the Queen Charlotte, young Queen Charlotte, as well as older Queen Charlotte as a Black woman, which is something a lot of people take issue with. Take a little sip of my juice. All right. Is the debate besides the point for a story that Rhimes herself describes as fantasy? The New York Times spoke to several historians about the series and also helped to kind of break down, some of the real life facts that are connected to the actual Queen Charlotte, who is a woman who lived. And let's talk about some of those facts. Okay. So who was Queen Charlotte? The basic facts of Charlotte's life are well documented. The real Princess Sophie Charlotte was born in 1744 in Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Where have we heard the word Mecklenburg? Charlotte, Mecklenburg County in North Carolina here in the United States. So that right there, we know that Charlotte, North Carolina, the place that we know as Charlotte, North Carolina, it's also known as Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, was named after Queen Charlotte. But in any case, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, which is now part of Germany, that's where she was born. At the very young age of 17, Princess Charlotte married King George III 6 hours after her arrival in London. The couple had their first child, George IV, in 1762, and followed by 14, rewind that, followed by 14 more children. Whew, she had a classroom filled of kids, okay? So the first 25 years of their life together, they attended plays, hosted concerts, invited a young Mozart to perform for them in 1764. In 1788, King George III experienced a serious bout of mental illness. Now this is deep. Okay, you know what? I don't want to spoil for you all. Okay, I got to tell you because maybe you need to go watch it for yourselves. This whole kind of a thing with mental illness is kind of a part of the series on Netflix, so you'll kind of see how that comes about. It's not as clear at first, but if you're a watcher, if you're a fan of the whole Bridgerton series, if you're a fan of Shonda Rhimes, you'll probably check it out and see how she pulls this story together. But in real life, it says, historical accounts that he did have a mental illness that involved mania that worsened over time. That King George was often kept isolated, and that he and Charlotte led, as they became older, more separate lives. By historical accounts, she died in 1818, and her husband, George III, died 2 years later. Okay, so those are some of the facts. And if you there is a royal website. If you're like a real history buff, you can go to royal.uk, which is where, the royal family keeps a lot of details and historical biographies and events, births, deaths on this particular website. And they do have a page for Queen Charlotte. It says that she was born in 1744, that she passed in 1818, that she was born Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, that she was the youngest daughter of Duke Charles Louis Frederick of Mecklenburg-Strelitz and Princess Elizabeth Albertina of Saxe-Hildburghausen. Okay, now what's interesting to me is if you look on some of these historical websites, the World.uk website, there's a few others as well. If you were, to Google Queen Charlotte or Queen Charlotte history, you'll see that there are some paintings and artworks that depict Queen Charlotte as not, I would say by the human eye, as not being a Caucasian or a white woman. Just looking at some of her features, her nose, her hair, it appears that she could be a woman of color. But a woman of color in what ethnic or in what heritage path or in what ethnicity, in my view, I do not know. However, it is stated that they believed that she was a biracial, a woman of mixed heritage, a descendant of a Black Portuguese royal family, Black in color. But Portuguese in terms of her racial background and the region that her ancestors were from. According to this same New York Times article that I mentioned, many historians disagree with that theory. However, in developing this new Netflix series, Shonda Rhimes says she's less interested in a debate because she understands she's creating a fictional story with historical elements in which a Black queen, Charlotte, lived and ruled valiantly while caring for her king. And so it certainly makes an interesting story. The point of controversy, however, is that Queen Charlotte, as a member of the present day royal family that we know about, the one with the children of, Prince Harry and all of the different things we've been finding out about. Okay, they recently had a coronation. So Prince Charles is now King Charles, because we know that his mother passed recently. His father passed in recent years. We know that Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have come to the United States. And we know that there's certainly been a lot of controversy and changes within the royal family. But one thing is for sure, there's always some news surrounding them. And I think there's always going to be some kind of an interest related to them. And so when Shonda Rhimes comes up with a series and it has a Black woman or someone Black at the forefront, I think people really do become interested. It's intriguing. And also, people do like to see where the connection to history has been. We know this world is not a completely white world. That would be nuts to assume that all throughout history that everyone who ever lived and everyone who ever held a position, be it royal or not, be they notable, famous or not, we know that, we're all descendants going back to Africa. So whether you like it or not, there are plenty of people who presenting in appearance may look one way, but if you really look into their genes and DNA, hey, they have a lot of diverse, heritage going on. So I don't think that it would be completely out of line, or completely, just ridiculous or outrageous that there would have been a Black queen who lived. Why not? There was certainly so much intermixing and, with marriages, with mating and all of that, throughout time. We know that Africa spans from, South Africa all the way to North Africa to Egypt, and people that have intermixing genes and heritage with Indian people, with people of Spanish heritage, with so many different backgrounds. So it's not, ridiculous to think, okay, maybe Queen Charlotte or maybe a member of the royal family was actually Black or did actually have African heritage or Portuguese heritage or Indian heritage, Asian heritage, and things like that. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to mention about Queen Charlotte. Again, there's a historian by the name of Ariane Shernock, a professor at Boston University, who specializes in British and European history. And she has certainly been a person who's argued the question over Queen Charlotte's potential background as being a woman of color. And she states, we know that Queen Charlotte had Portuguese ancestry. She was a German princess, the daughter of a duke. When Charlotte arrived in Britain in 1761, she didn't speak English. I find that to be really interesting. There's another website that says Queen Charlotte spoke French. So, that's giving you some idea that she definitely had some diverse, language, history, and most likely based on some of the paintings, the earlier paintings of her, like I mentioned, if you Google Queen Charlotte, you'll see the depiction of her is not a white or a Caucasian woman, that most likely she was a person of diverse heritage. And I think anyone who questions that, Google is your friend. It's free and it's at your fingertips. And you can certainly research some of the historians that look into these things. And you can certainly research what Shonda Rhimes' interest was in making her a Black woman or a biracial woman or anything, like that. But other than that, sure, check out Queen Charlotte. It's a 6-part series running on Netflix now. It's really interesting. It has some engaging points and some entertaining points to it. There's some people that have taken issue with showing the fact that she's supposed to be 17, getting married to a grown man, an adult man, or a young man. Some people took issue with that, with some of the sexuality that's shown in terms of this possibly being a minor young girl, young lady. But we know that back in the day, heck, they had 13 and 14-year-olds getting married. I mean, and we know that there used to not be any laws where that was concerned. So perhaps Shonda Rhimes and co. are just depicting how things were historically. By all accounts, like I mentioned, on these various websites, it does say that she got married at the age of 17. To us, we're all aghast, but we know that by the time you're 17 biologically, you can have a baby, right? I mean, there are 13, 12, 11, 10-year-olds having kids. So to say that she was 17 and got married, and if you're so shocked by that, then I don't know, where have you been? Because we have children in our country that are, having kids and doing other things, and they're not necessarily, married or whatever. It just is what it is. Human nature being what it is, and with the culture of the royal family at that time, you were, you were in a situation where you were going to have an arranged marriage, whether you liked it or not. And probably by a certain age, that person, you were quote unquote betrothed to that person. And you were young because they were looking at, hey, this person has to be really young because we want them to have just so many kids, so many children, and so many heirs to carry on the family line and the family legacy. So I'm not saying it's right for a 17-year-old to have been betrothed to a grown man or to a man who appears, well, in the series, he looks like he's probably no more than 19 or 20. I'm not saying it's right, but if this is based on some historical facts, I mean, what can you say? Argue with history? I don't know. Or argue with Shonda Rhimes? I don't know. She's laughing all the way to the bank right now. Okay. So next, thank y'all for being patient and listening to my talk on Queen Charlotte. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about Dear Mama. Dear Mama, the docuseries, the new docuseries on FX, also presented by Hulu, written and directed by Alan Hughes, with a number of wonderful producers, including, I believe, Nelson George, the TV writer, TV producer, has also played a part in bringing this to the screen. And what we have here is a several-part series. It's a docuseries, so it has several episodes. So we have Ep 1, and this is all about Tupac. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right off. It's been a busy week, y'all. Let me take a sip of my juice. Y'all want to know what I'm drinking on this Good Friday night? I have an Evolution juice, and this is, I love these. They're so good and so healthy and tasty for you. It's apple, orange, raspberry, strawberry, mango, and acerola cherry. Can you see that? It's so good for you, and it's so yummy when it's nice and cold. Stay hydrated. Okay. Dear Mama. So it's a new series about Tupac, and I think it's so cool because there was this movie that came out about Tupac some years ago, and I would try to watch it, but it was just so weird because I don't know, it seemed to be all about Tupac in like the negative light, right? It was like it was about his life, but it was more to me about like Tupac as the entertainer and as a character. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think that looking at the docuseries, I think it makes you feel a lot closer to Tupac as a person who lived and who impacted the culture, but not just from the standpoint of his music, but from the standpoint of the folks that he came from. His mother, Afeni Shakur, the communities in which he lived, the schools in which he was educated, the art schools he attended, right? And the political leanings, beliefs, and ideologies of his mother and the many adults who connected to his mother would impact Tupac's, not only his politics, but also how those politics showed through his creativity, right? I feel like, based on what I've seen, and I haven't watched all of the eps yet, so we have episode 1 is Panther Power. 17-year-old Tupac Shakur navigates school, poverty, and family while dreaming of using poetry and music to spread the message of his mother. Noted Black Panther activist Afeni Shakur. Haunted by her Black Panther past, Afeni fears how it will affect Tupac's promising future. So in Ep 1, right, we're introduced to Tupac's cousins. So he's got, this is what I love about this series. Shout out to Alan Hughes and to the whole team and folks behind this series who have brought this to light, because if we do not tell our stories, they will certainly be told for us, and those gaps and things that the public and youth and people don't know will be filled in with a lot of foolishness, things that are not true, and things that certainly misrepresent some of these icons and some of these artists and geniuses who have lived. So despite whatever you might feel or think about hip hop, or despite whatever you may feel or think about Tupac, or the Black Panthers, or his mom, Afeni Shakur, and people who had a very great hand in trying to change things within the community and trying to make things better, right, within our communities, you cannot deny that Tupac had a great impact on our culture, on hip hop, on youth, on even things that are taught in colleges today, right? Like Tupac is one of the subjects in hip hop, one of the very first, I believe, artists to have colleges, including Ivy League colleges and universities, focus on his rap and focus on his poetry as being valuable to curriculum and valuable to critical discussions and analysis of culture and of hip hop and of even history, American history, Black history, hip hop history, right? It's all a part of our history, American studies. So I would venture to say that Tupac Shakur and his mother and people connected to this docuseries right here, this is a bit of American studies right here that you can use for any classroom. So shout out to any AP language, English, and AP history teachers out there, professors out there who are looking for really engaging ideas related to hip hop. What can you teach and bring into the classroom to go back into some hip hop history that's like where you can really have some critical discussions, where you can really give students some very interesting, engaging projects that layer on with digital humanities. I would say this docuseries, Dear Mama, is certainly one of them. Okay, so I just gave you the synopsis of Panther Power. So that's episode 1. Episode 2, the synopsis is, well, it's titled Changes. But the synopsis is Tupac bursts onto the scene in both music and the movies, but trying to be a mainstream star and a militant activist at the same time comes at a cost. Afeni's activism lands her and her Panther comrades in the center of a political show trial that could end with all of them in prison for the rest of their lives. Episode 3, So Many Tears. I'll give you the synopsis of this one. Tupac's legal troubles escalate, with multiple different arrests in different states, culminating in his being charged with sexual assault in New York. Afeni is the voice of the New York Panthers, Panther 21, defending herself at trial and shocking the world when the verdict comes down. Tupac's criminal trial comes to a different end. Episode number 4, and that's where we leave off at because there's a new episode tonight, episode 5 coming. Episode number 4, which aired last weekend, Ambitions as a Writer. I thought it was interesting that they spelled ambitions with a Z on the end, and as with a Z, and a writer instead of writer is writer, R-I-D-A-H. Tupac spends nearly a year at the notorious Clinton Correctional Facility at Dannemora. He leaves hardened by the experience and immediately joins the equally notorious Death Row Records. The contrast between his new persona and his activist upbringing is more stark than ever, and his life grows ever more dangerous. So that's where I left off last week. All right, so without too much spoilers or things like that, because definitely you got to check it out for yourself. If you're a hip hop head, if you're a history professor, if you are a digital humanities or American studies or Black studies or Africana studies professor or educator or curriculum leader or program director in institutions or schools or colleges where you serve students who you know would be appreciative of this kind of curriculum and this kind of exploration, right? Of culture, of cultural studies, of hip hop studies, of Black arts of social and historical social justice movements, then again, Dear Mama docuseries would be a great, wonderful, worthwhile resource for your program curricular and innovative instructional needs, right? Okay, so that's the scholar in me talking, and y'all probably went to sleep on that bit. That's fine. I'm going to do it anyway, because I always have a bit of my educator hat on. Even when I'm talking and jiving, I'm still teaching. Right on. Okay, so Dear Mama, I'm going to give you some of my thoughts, all right? So I'm not going to do this in a scholarly or TED Talk manner. I just want to talk to you all, right? And give you some of my thoughts about Tupac, about his mom, Afeni Shakur, and about the docuseries, just what I've seen so far, right? Again, shout out to Alan Hughes and company who have brought this to life and brought this to FX Hulu, and who has done, well, I'm getting tongue twisted, right? Who has done a great thing to putting this out there in the culture for us to view, talk about, think about, critically discuss. And as you see here, I'm doing a whole podcast where I'm talking about Dear Mama. So obviously it was of great interest to me as well. Okay, so one thing that I didn't know, right? So the interviews in this docuseries are just excellent. Like Alan Hughes and company, they got Afeni Shakur's sister, Glow, Tupac's aunt, to be a part of this. And in every episode, she's talking and she's giving you the background and she's filling in the gaps of what the public has never known about Tupac. The situation surrounding, his birth even, about his mother, Afeni Shakur, her dreams, her background, where she came from. I'm appreciating this so much. Glow talks about how she and her sister, Afeni, they came up from the South. They came up from the South and they moved to New York. Okay, and this is before Afeni, well, this is before Tupac was born, right? And so they have this whole life and they have their Southern upbringing, and then they meet with the New York culture, all the diversity, all the smells, all the sights, and certainly what was going on in the world at that time. This is civil rights movement. Okay, this is the Black Panthers. This is Black people wanting to be seen as full human beings, wanting to be treated equally, and taking those steps to get that equality and get that freedom. So just skipping around, the circumstances surrounding Tupac's birth were not necessarily ideal or comfortable or what you would call a dream or a fantasy. Because Miss Afeni Shakur, she was a Black Panther, but she had been in relationship with more than one man. And at a point, there was a point in time where she said she was not quite sure who the father of Tupac was, because there were two particular men who were in her life and who were very close to her. One of these men has been interviewed in the series, and it was really wonderful to see, okay, Tupac's father, right? As in the father that Tupac knew as his father, or who his family knew to be his father. And they were saying that really there could only be one man who was his father, because one of the men that Afeni had a relationship with, he had told her he could not have children biologically. And I mean, wouldn't a man know if he couldn't have children? A man would know if he couldn't have kids because he had probably tried before, right? So that left a process of, weeding out her knowing that, okay, it comes down to one man, right? And he talked about Afeni Shakur. I did not write his name down, you all, but it's in the documentary if you watch the first few episodes. He talked about Afeni Shakur being such a beautiful, asked why he was drawn to her, right? Even though they weren't married. or they did not get married. And I think at some point, Afeni Shakur was incarcerated for some things related to her work with the Black Panthers. So the men in her life, and this particular man who is believed to be the father of Tupac, said that she was such a beautiful woman, a brilliant woman, a woman who loved her community and who was willing to fight for her community and do whatever was needed. And, there were a lot of men at that time, especially in the Black Panther movement, who were attracted to that, who were attracted to a woman with a very strong cultural identity, a very strong identity within her community, and a very strong love for her community. And that's what Afeni Shakur was showing at that time. And what struck me so much in watching these episodes and listening to Glow, Afeni Shakur's sister, and listening to Tupac Shakur's cousins, Billy and Dante, and all the different people who were around them, kind of talking about the history of their family and the history of how Tupac came to be. It's like, wow, Tupac was created in love. Whether you look at, his mother, Afeni, as having had a love story with his father or a love story with the Panthers, it was a love story nonetheless, because Afeni Shakur loved her people, loved her community, and her activism was very strong. And so it's really no shock or no surprise that Tupac, as a young man, they interviewed him as a 17-year-old student who was attending a high school of the arts. And he talked about living in an impoverished community. But he also talked about, okay, we may be poor, right? But he was rich in knowledge, rich in the knowledge that his mother passed down to him. And one of the things Tupac said is that his mother always taught him to speak up. If you see something that isn't right in your community, you see something that you don't agree with, or you see people that are being taken advantage of, speak out, say something, do something about it. And so I see that thread from Afeni Shakur to her son, to her unborn son. She was pregnant during a time when she was, I believe, according to one of the episodes, she was actually on trial for her political activism. She was in prison. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a point in time during her pregnancy with Tupac that she was in prison, or at least shortly before he was born. She had gone through a lot of strife and a lot of, coming under fire for her activism. And so it's almost like as if, Tupac was born and he was already initiated with that fire. He already was initiated and had that mantle upon him, right? To speak out, serve, and create for and with and within, right, his community. And that's kind of the way I see it. And what's really beautiful about this docuseries also is that it gives you those flashbacks, right? So it's like it's talking about Tupac, but then it's going back to his mother and what her foundation and what her history was. And, her sister, his Aunt Glow, who would be, his mother's sister, talking about some of the things that his mother went through, the struggles, and being a Black woman and being a Black woman raising a son on her own as a single parent in America and in an impoverished community, and not having all of the money and resources that maybe she would have wanted to have. Tupac mentions at some point, we were poor, and it's because our ideals always got in the way. He talked about, hey, my mother could have gone to college. She could have done this. She could have done that. Her ideals, meaning what I took that to mean is, hey, it's more important to fight the power. More important for us to, struggle financially and still keep our principles and our morals and the ideals that keep us, quote unquote, free, right? But then you hear Tupac saying in one of the episodes, that it seems that you can get as far as you want to in this society, right? As long as you don't question anything, as long as you don't question what's happening. And so I found that to be interesting. And this is when he was a teenager. So fast forward to now, in Tupac in his early 20s, in his mid-20s, being now a superstar recording artist, hip-hop recording artist, being someone who has become a movie star. So not only is he known to be a very prolific rapper, a dynamic rapper and a performer, he's now known as a persona and an actor on screen. And I remember back in the day, like, people used to say, well, Tupac was about that thug life. Tupac represented thug life, and he was, he had a gangster background. None of that was true. Tupac wasn't a gangster, nor did he have a gangster background. Tupac was a poet raised by a Black Panther who became a quote unquote thug in the eyes of society. And yes, even by his own labeling, he had that big tattoo at the bottom of his, under his rib cage or on his stomach that said Thug Life. I sometimes wonder, as I'm watching this docuseries, right? Because I've seen other interviews with Tupac where he wasn't throwing up the hands and wearing the bandanas and all that. Where Tupac was clear-eyed, where Tupac was very sober in his speaking, where Tupac was not animated in his delivery as he was being interviewed. So it makes you wonder, as you're watching the docuseries, is this a created persona that I'm watching? Was Tupac in a lot of ways almost a stereotype or a figment of society's imagination? Did Tupac become who they wanted him to become? Or was this who Tupac really was by the end of his life? And again, I don't know how the documentary answers that because we haven't gotten to the end. I know the latest episode number 5 comes on tonight. I haven't watched it. It usually comes on 8, 9, 10 o'clock. I can catch it on demand. I don't always watch it when it comes on. But what I'm saying is I would love to see how the docuseries answers who was Tupac. Was Tupac who his mother created him to be? Was Tupac the poet he created himself to be, the rebel? Or was Tupac, the thug life, gangsta, death row comrade, that society at a time created him to be? It was quoted in one of the episodes that Tupac, and I won't say that word that was used, I'll just say men. They said Tupac lived the life of 3 men in 8 months. That's basically what they said. And what's so interesting is now, right, if you're in the world of psychology or sociology, in recent years, I would say in the last decade to 15 years, there's been a new designation that adolescence goes until age 25, right? That a person is not fully developed at the age of, when people say, oh, well, you're 18, you can be emancipated. You're 16, you're on your own, you can be emancipated. You're 17, you're 18, you can get out of my house. You're a full adult. Technically, that's not correct. At the age of 17, 18, a young person's brain is still not fully developed in certain aspects. In terms of reasoning and decision making and identity and self-actualization and even logic, it's not fully there, right? And I know this from being an educator, and I've worked with students of every grade. I've even worked with older adults to know that the learning process, right, never stops. That all people learn differently. No two people, no two youth or adults learn the same. But I definitely know that teenagers at the age of 16, 17, 18, even 19, are not fully developed, are not always fully mature, responsible, logical, critical thinkers, able to look out after themselves and make good decisions for themselves and the people around them. So when I'm watching this documentary and they are interviewing 20 or 21 or 22-year-old Tupac, or they are showing him in a trial where his freedom is at stake and he's in his 20s, or they're saying that, hey, he shot at someone, or hey, he raped someone, I'm watching them and I'm just shaking my head and I'm like, I don't think folks realized back then that this is not a full-grown man. He technically was still an adolescent, if we go by, or still in adolescent development, still developing, still on a path to becoming an adult, brain-wise, mentally, right? Just not fully, formed. So as I'm watching some of these episodes, I'm like, wow. In some of his communication, expression, and delivery, Tupac appears, for legal reasons, I'm going to say appears, and I'm going to say the word allegedly, because I don't need anyone coming after me, anyone from his estate or anyone else. This is my observation as a viewer and as a fan. In some of his interviews and in some of his delivery and the way he talks and the way he speaks to people, you see almost a mania about him. You see a manic side of his persona or his personality. You see someone who appears to go from very high highs to very low lows. Some of that, I think, from observation, my personal observation, I'm not saying it's true, I'm not saying it's real, I'm not a certified psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything like that, but I am an educator who's worked with all ages of youth, including college students and people at that age, right? It appears as though so much was on Tupac's shoulders. So much was upon him. He felt that he had to do so much to save and give to his community. But at the same time, he wanted to be an artist. And it was almost like his artistic self was fighting with his activist self. Because even his activist self, it almost seemed like there wasn't a clear structure or organization for him to do that within. Because the Black Panthers, as we knew it, was not, I would say, I'm not going to say not existing, because we know that the Black Panthers have existed, but it appears from the historical recording of Tupac's life that he necessarily was not an active member of the Black Panthers as he became a rapper and a performer and an actor. But yet he still subscribed to many of those ideologies and those politics, right? He still cared about the Black community. He still cared about much of what his mother, Afeni Shakur, cared about, and much of what he was born and groomed and raised to care about. But the battle, there seemed to be such a battle between Tupac warring with the public and warring and with the stereotypes and the stigmas of him being a thug, and of, I think, his own expectations of himself. And then you have expectations of others. And then you have the clique, right? How Tupac got charged as a rapist, it's just so troubling and so sad, right? And I'm not going to fully go into that whole, case. You can read it and you can think about you can look up the episode and think about for yourself, was Tupac a rapist? Like, it's very troubling and very bothersome to even think about that, for everything this man appeared to stand for, So when we get to that part in his story in the docuseries, I'm just like, why? Because it seemed to be one thing after another. And the last thing you want to hear is that the man who wrote Dear Mama and Brenda's Got a Baby, a conscious rapper who was for the people and for his mama and for, women, that he would then turn around and become a rapist or a woman abuser. I'll just leave it at that. It's very sad. And I knew about or heard about that case many years ago. But just how it all played out is very sad, because it even sounds as though some of the people around him, right? Sometimes it doesn't always have to be you. Sometimes it could just be, affiliation, or it could be, as people say, association, or, I wasn't there. I was there, but I wasn't there. That kind of thing. This gray line, right? It's just very sad. And I'll be honest, just as a fan, I never want to think of Tupac as someone who would or could hurt women. I never want to think of Tupac as someone who could or would take advantage of women, or take advantage of someone who is vulnerable, or someone who themselves was maybe trusting in you. So I just think, that's kind of sad as far as his history. There's things within the docuseries that are really hard to watch, hard to hear, hard to listen to. And then to see him at times, it was as if he was like just done for at a very young age, that is almost like, wow, does this young man have any hope left? But he seemed to keep reinventing himself. He seemed to keep, all right, I've done this part. I've done thug life. I've been the sensitive poet. I've been the man who says, "Dear Mama, Brenda's got a baby," bringing attention to all these things. And then he went into the quote unquote thug life, and then it was Death Row Records. And it just seemed like he had so many lives within a life. And I'm like, you know what, brother, I understand. Because sometimes it feels that way, right? That you've lived so many lives and been in so many different eras and different, cultural aspects of your community, that you've been a part of it and you've lived it, seen it, watched it, and recorded it. And it's like, wow, I've been through so many phases, right? And so that's what I got, so far from Dear Mama. And also, I love the quotes. There were people saying, Tupac was a myth builder, a fantasy writer, a Zen master. Someone said he was a Zen master because he mastered the moment. He could live just within this moment, right? And I personally think that's a gift of a young person, to live in the moment. I would say most young people, most kids live in the moment. It's for now. It's what they want now. It's what they want to feel, do, think, say right now, as opposed to future. So I would say, looking at Tupac, him being a young man in his 20s, in some ways, he appeared so wise beyond his years. But then in other ways, like I said to you, could we even, you shouldn't be surprised if Tupac himself made mistakes in his life, because young people make mistakes. 20-something-year-olds make mistakes. Like they always say, if you're going to make a bunch of mistakes, that's the time in your life to do it, right? The time where you can explore and experiment and question your identity and question, why am I here? What is the meaning and purpose of life? Do I want to be like my parents, or do I want to be like someone else? Do I want to be this, or do I want to be that? Am I who people say I am, or am I a totally different creation of my own thinking, or what have you? And I feel like Tupac played with all of that. He played with the vision that his mother had for him, I think. He played with the vision that, was put upon him as an art student in high school. He played with the vision or the stereotype that society wanted to put on him as a young black male. And then he even played with and experimented the vision or intention that the music industry or Hollywood would have for him, whether it was a part or whether it was a record or a record deal or a video. Like Tupac, talk about changes. This young man went through some changes, but I really think that he impacted so many people. Back in the day when I was teaching middle school, I had Tupac's book, The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And I would share some of the poems from that book. And I was just like, you know what? Tupac may have been a rapper, but he was certainly a poet. And when I say a poet, it's that reflective, artistic part of yourself, right? That can just be within yourself and be by yourself with your pen and your pad, right? And I got that right here because that's what we do. We're always scribbling and scribing. I feel like Tupac's creativity first started with him in his mother's womb, because I believe his mother was an artist, Afeni Shakur, and she passed on her dreams to Tupac, but I also think she passed on her fears and her challenges as well. As a Black woman struggling to raise a Black son in society, worrying about, was he going to face the same fate as some of the people in the communities she had seen in terms of the struggles, the racial struggles, inequalities, and things like that. Tupac, I feel, was almost like a gifted seer, who decided to plant and put himself in so many circumstances so that he could learn and grow, but also so other people could learn and grow through him. Even though it seemed like it was filled with pain and drama, so much of it, right? But yeah, there's, I didn't give a whole lot of the details away. So if you still want to watch Dear Mama, you definitely should. There's more to see, definitely. Like, there's an episode 5 tonight. And as I mentioned to you, so Ep 1 is titled Panther Power. Ep 2 is titled Changes. Ep 3 is titled So Many Tears, right? Ep 4 is titled Ambitions as a Writer. Ep 5 is Until the End of Time. And I don't know if there's another ep after 5, but you'll have to definitely check it out. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say on Dear Mama. And may Tupac continue to rest in peace and power, as well as his mother, Afeni Shakur. Okay, so I also wanted to talk about the whole date a bus driver. Okay, so just to get back to this discussion, only because there are still people that are posting about it, and I was done with it last week, but this whole thing has come up about Ebony K. Williams, or perhaps people who may agree with her stance that, hey, if you date a bus driver, it means you're dating down, or you're settling, or you're dumbing down as a Black woman. Okay. The other piece to that is, from what I'm seeing in the debates online on social media, is that there are people saying that being a bus driver is equivalent to being mediocre, being a C student in school. Y'all, it's a little exhausting at this point. So here's the thing. We know that, you're going to be with who you're going to be with, regardless of what they do for a living. And sometimes the person you want does not want you. Okay, real talk. You may be going after a certain type of a person, and maybe that person does not feel that you're equally yoked. Maybe whether it's in career, values, class, religion, lifestyle. You're a vegetarian, they eat pork. You work out 9 times a week. They love to sit on the couch and eat, Frito-Lays and Twinkies. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. I really don't think it's about what a person does for a living. Now, if a person, you feel their values don't meet with yours, their lifestyle doesn't meet with yours, their religious background or cultural ideals or whatever the case may be, their daily routine doesn't meet with yours. They watch TV and play video games all day. You like to go walk in the park and go to the museums and art shows and give back to charity and volunteer at the local hospital. Then maybe you all don't mix. It's not about what a person does for a living, y'all. And it's also, I'm not gonna say it's never about money, because we know that people get divorced behind finances. We know that if you have children are very expensive. Education is expensive. food, clothing, shelter, gas, and whatever else you need for daily living and comforts. These things cost money. So I would never say to a person, don't desire someone who's gainfully employed or but for me, I just think some of this is about purpose and values and intention, lifestyle, shared goals and vision. And if those things don't match up, it's not going to work. It's not going to work whether they're the bus driver or Barack Obama. It's not going to work whether they are Luke Skywalker or Luke, don't stop, get it, Luke in Miami, Florida. It's just not going to work. Okay, so I guess I'm just kind of sick of the whole bus driver discussion because quite frankly, some of you all are saying, oh, she's getting on black men about being mediocre. Girl, black men are not the only men who drive a bus. Why do you all think everything is a black man? Everything is not what a black man is doing or not doing. That is so small-minded. And even in the discussion with Iyanla Vanzant and Ebony K. Williams, Iyanla Vanzant never said to Ebony, would you date a black bus driver? No, she didn't. She said, would you date a bus driver? Point blank, period. So if Ebony doesn't date black men, maybe in her mind that would be, would I date a white bus driver? Or would I date a Latinx bus driver? Would I date an Asian bus driver? And if she said no, she said what she said. Y'all are going to argue with someone's preference? You don't argue with the NBA or football player who wants to marry a Latinx woman. You don't argue with a big baller who does not date or an actor who doesn't date or marry black women. So why are you going to argue with a black woman's preference? It's not your business. You don't pay her bills. You don't rock her to sleep at night when she's crying, sad, depressed, isolated, or lonely. So this is why I don't understand why some people seem like when a black woman speaks, or woman of color particularly, speaks on a preference, something she wants or does not want in her life, y'all got to get up and have a whole schoolyard fight with bacon, eggs, and cereal in the morning just because a black woman said, you know what, I don't prefer that, I prefer this. And meanwhile, you don't drag anyone else for their preferences. So that's all I have to say on that. Stay hydrated. Okay, next, new addition. Congratulations to the fellas. Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike. Wait a minute. Can I name all of them? Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike, Johnny. Who am I missing? Ralph. Okay. Congratulations to the fellas. New addition, 40 years, or maybe it's over 40 years of entertaining the masses. Candy Girl with Candy Girl and I'm Still in Love and Tenderoni and It's My Prerogative and all these great, thank you, Ralph, and all these great songs. I mean, these men are still jamming. Yes. You want to know, did I go see them? Yes. I went to go see the Legacy Tour and they were on fire. I decided to be a grown candy girl for one night and I had a good time and treat myself. Okay. And I had a good time, and it was mainly really to just see these men like, wow, they've come such a long way. They had a whole documentary on their lives that was on BET, I think, a few years ago. And Bobby Brown also had a documentary on his life, and it's just so fascinating to know that they came all the way from Boston, I believe Roxbury Projects, Boston, Massachusetts, to who they are today. These men are in their 50s. They are entrepreneurs. They're husbands, fathers. And looking at the way Ronnie and Ricky and them were moving, I was like, man, these men are moving like they are still teenagers. And even Bobby, okay, I was proud of Bobby. Bobby Brown, Bobby got up there and sang, My Heart Belongs to Tenderoni. Yes, he did. And he might not have been, doing all the steps like, in movement, in choreo with all the fellas, but you could feel Bobby's presence, and the crowd went crazy whenever Bobby sang. And when he showed up in the lineup with them, it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. Shout out to New Edition. They're still doing their thing. And it was great to see Johnny Gill, break off and sing his songs. He's got, there you go, there you go, there you go. What's the other song? Do you feel the magic in my when I do and love you the right way? Boy, are you kidding me? We were jamming when Johnny hit that. Oh, the choreography is crazy. And when New Edition did, if it isn't love, come on, y'all know it doesn't feel this way. Why does she stay on? I was a candy girl, okay? That night I was like, come on, y'all, let's sing all the songs, even though I don't know all of them by heart. I know the harmonies, I know some of the dances from the videos and stuff, but basically, yes, I am a fan, and I love to see them do their thing, and I'm very proud of them. Because, you feel like, hey, they're part of the hip hop generation, right? They may be more so like R&B soul, but, Teddy Riley produced some of their songs. Teddy Riley worked with all of them, Bobby Brown, and he's worked with Guy, and he produced that kind of hip hop R&B sound, that New Jack Swing. So New Edition is definitely part of the hip hop genre. Okay, last but not least, I was really surprised. Well, first off, shout out to Anita Baker, who I love. She is just such an iconic songstress in Black culture, R&B soul. Anita has so many iconic love songs that we can all point to, those kind of songs that they probably played at like many of the weddings, and you would just hear them at special moments, holiday gatherings and barbecues and family reunions and things like that. So Anita Baker had a concert in which she was headlining the other day in Newark, New Jersey. But Babyface, also an iconic R&B artist in Black culture, also was supposed to perform at this concert. But what's interesting is many of the fans were tweeting and complaining that Babyface did not actually go on. He actually did not get a chance to perform, and Babyface himself posted a statement or a disclaimer of sorts stating why he wasn't able to go on, that he was very sorry to disappoint the fans, and that there was a delayed show or some kind of technical difficulty. Okay, now I was not there, all right? So I cannot speak on certain things. And I will say allegedly, I do not know what happened. However, I would say, I have one question. Why would, Babyface is a huge artist, like, why wouldn't he be headlining his own show though? I didn't understand why it was Anita Baker and Babyface. Like I could see maybe someone maybe not as iconic as Babyface being, opening for her. But I just kind of thought, well, in a way it doesn't, I don't know if it fully gives the fans that full experience to be with Anita Baker, as it may not fully give the experience that fans want to be with Babyface. And so I could understand if people were very disappointed that, yes, they came to see Anita Baker, but they also came to see Babyface as well. Babyface has so many hits, and he's produced so many hits. And then Anita Baker has got such a great catalog that it's kind of like, I don't think I'd want to see them together. I would want to see them separate so I could experience each of them, on their own. You know what I mean? Because just to give them that respect, because they're both huge people in our culture and in the Black R&B soul music genre, that it's like, wow, to kind of make one of them the opening act for the other is almost like undercutting one or kind of insulting one. But okay, that's just my ideas. And again, allegedly, I mean, maybe he did perform, I don't know. But what they said on Twitter was that he did not perform, and even Babyface himself put out a disclaimer. He doesn't want his fans to be mad at him, and I understand. What we need is Babyface, give us a concert with you. After 7, the group that you produced, the group you were in or whatnot. You After 7, Tony Braxton, and maybe one other act that you produce, and we would love to have that. And Anita Baker, we love you. We can see you on your own, and maybe have some other acts, maybe a Chrisette Michelle or Jasmine Sullivan and people like that can open for you, or some of the other singers that we would enjoy, but we know that you are the queen, the headlining act of that. And then Babyface can headline his own show. That's just my thinking. I don't know. I'm just one fan, one voice, right? Okay, y'all. So look, that's all I have for you tonight. I didn't plan to be before you too long. Thank you for joining me here on That's Code with DuEwa Frazier. And I hope that you will visit my website, DuEwaFrazier.com. And in case you did not know, I am a poet and children's author. I'm also a TED speaker, a keynote speaker, a creative and educational consultant, an educator, and I am a children's book writer. And this is my book, Alice's Musical Debut. If you have any youngins in your life who love to read, or if you have some little babies and some toddlers who you love to read to, this is a beautiful book filled with illustrations. It reimagines one day in the life of the late notable great jazz harpist, pianist, and wife of legendary jazz artist John Coltrane, Miss Alice Coltrane. So this is just a historical fiction children's picture book. And I'd love for you to check it out. My book is on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. And you can also tweet me on at DuEwa Frazier1 on Twitter. Follow me here on Instagram at DuEwa, Dr. DuEwa Writes. And you can also follow my other podcast, Nerdosity Podcast. Shout out to all the poets I've been interviewing. Hey, round of applause. We just finished National Poetry Month in April, where I interviewed poets Derek Weston Brown, Roberto Carlos Garcia, Ellen Hagen, Dr. Reina J. Leon, Maya Marshall. I have a lot of new episodes that are up. So check that out wherever you can get your podcasts. Also my YouTube channel, youtube.com/DuEwa World. And I hope that you do subscribe. All right, leave me your comments about any of the things I discussed. And if you don't agree with me on anything I said, that's fine. You can leave those too. If you want to leave a nice compliment or just say, hi, DuEwa, how's it going? That would be great. I love to hear the highs and how are you? And lastly, happy Mother's Day, y'all. Have a happy and blessed Mother's Day weekend, whether you're a mother, an auntie, a sister, a great aunt, a teacher, a godmother. We love you, mamas. And make sure you check out Dear Mama, the docuseries on FX. Episode 5 is airing tonight, okay? All right. DuEwa here. Have a blessed night. Thanks for joining me. Peace.